They had 8 children, some of whom were born in Russia, and some of whom were born here. I am Donald Horowitz, the firstborn of their firstborn, Barney. Today is May 29th, 1981, and I am in Phoenix, Arizona, to interview their secondborn, my Aunt Ida. She was one of the children born in Russia, and I hope to elicit from her the story of the transfer of our roots from Russia to the United States and the subsequent growth and development of our family. Tell me, Aunt Ida, how old are you now?
I am 83 years old.
You were born when exactly?
December 18, 1897.
Right. And where were you born?
In Islam, Russia.
And where is that?
In Russia.
Yeah, so where about in Russia is it? Like in relationship to Moscow?
Well, I don't know how far from Moscow we were, but we were on the outskirts of Minsk. M-I-N-S-K.
Yeah, I've heard of Minsk. I know there's a lot of jokes about Minsk and Pinsk, but where is this? Is it Western Russia, Southern Russia?
I think it's south.
All righty. Now, did you live in this same town all the time that you were there?
All the time, yes.
How much do you remember of the town?
Well, it seems to me I remember everything, and when I look back, it seems to me that according to American standards, that it was one great big long block. I don't remember any streets intersecting. And at one end, there were a few people in business, but I do remember people we were pretty intimate with, and they had a dry goods store. And we used to, we as kids used to hang around there a little bit. And I know that people used to come in, they'd bring them milk, they'd come out with materials. People made their own.
And then they bought it. They bought
it. Everything was bought. I know my father.
No, not bought. I say bartered. They swapped.
They swapped.
They came in with the milk and they came out with the dry goods.
Right.
This was common at that time in this town?
Yes. I don't know how it was anywhere else, but I know that in this town it was common. I know my father was a tailor. His father was a tailor. The boys all worked together. And I know I've seen them go in there and get materials, but they would sew. These people were the rich people of the city, and they would sew for the entire family. And I guess they intertraded. I never saw money, but I would see them go in and get it because I would go with my father.
Now, this part of town that you lived in, was it a Jewish section of town, or were the people all mixed?
Mixed.
It was all mixed at that time. I see. But there were rich people and there were poor people, just like everything else. But you were able to exist.
Yes.
I see.
I know we had our own chickens. I think we had a cow. That they would the milk, and we had the milk, and we had the eggs, and we had the chickens, and it was a poor existence. Looking back and comparing it with today.
Yes, of course. But your father was a tailor.
Yeah.
Right? And his clientele were as much from the Gentile community as they were from the Jewish community.
That's right.
Now, with this business of the swapping, would the Gentile community also swapped, or did they usually pay cash?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, well, I understand. You're going. I'm amazed.
I was young and I didn't, but I know because when we came to America, these people had sold out too and come to America, and we socialized when we visited, and they used to discuss in the house. Maybe it isn't so much that I remember from way back, but I remember the discussions at home.
Right, sure.
Because nothing could get away from me. Anything they talked about, secrets or anything, my ears were alert all the time.
Right. Well, what was life like in the house, right? There was your mother and your father, right?
Yeah.
There was Barney, and then there was you,
yeah.
right?
And there was Molly, and Frank wasn't even born yet.
Right, I understand that. And describe a typical day in the house. Did you ever go to school there at all?
No.
No. Okay, so what did you? You got up in the morning and what did you do? You went to the well for water, I assume? You didn't have any water?
To where?
To the well?
Yes.
Yeah, you didn't have any.
Well, we never did, but the folks did. But there was no amusement, no entertainment.
Well, what did you do over it? You got up in the morning, what did you do?
I don't know. I know we played outside with the kids. And I know my father sent me earrings from Europe. And one day my mother came out and a little boy, a little Shagert, was taking the earring out of my ear. So it was the same as it is today, mischievous.
Right.
But we had a few little girlfriends, and I don't remember going to a show. There were no shows in the town. If they did, anything, they went to Minsk. And the only thing of Minsk that I remember was before we came to America, health was very strict at Ellis Island.
Yes.
And especially when you crossed the ocean, you contacted something in the eye, trachoma.
Yes, I know.
Which I was allowed into Ellis Island, but when I was taken into school, they found that on my eyelids, and I was out of school, let alone that I came when I was past 8 years old. I went into the first grade when I was almost 9, because that's very contagious. So my mother took us to Minsk to a doctor for a checkup, and I remember going to an eye doctor because I remember him taking an instrument and turning my eyelids inside out, so I know it was an eye examination.
How did you get to Minsk? Did you walk? Did you go?
No, we had to go by horse and wagon.
By horse and wagon. That's what I wanted to know.
Who took us? I don't know.
There were no buses or trolleys.
But that's the only thing.
Do you have any idea how long did it take you?
No.
I'm amazed.
No, it was probably a couple of hours. It weren't too far from.
Getting back to your life in the house, you obviously had chores and jobs that you had to do, right? No, you didn't have to do anything.
Because the place was small. I remember the brick oven.
Yeah, describe the house.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember a brick oven, and all the cooking was done in there. The fuel was put underneath, because I remember it was like in a little hallway, and the chickens used to come in and hide underneath, where it was warm. And even in the wintertime, the back of it was like flat. In the wintertime, some of us slept there. Because I remember a narrow thing. I remember I was sick. And my mother wouldn't let me, the rest of the house, maybe it was cold, that's what I think. And she kept me up there, maybe away from the other children. I had pneumonia, I don't know how many times. And I remember she brought me goodies and things, but the others shouldn't see. Maybe there wasn't enough,
right.
And I was sick and I needed them. So I remember that little... this is the room where I'm showing you, and the oven was here, and there was a narrow hallway where if you wanted to get on top of the oven where it was warm, you could get up there.
Was the house just had just the one big room?
No.
Oh, how many rooms were there?
Yeah, I remember the small kitchen. I remember a room with a table. No living room. No living room, but 2 bedrooms. How he slept in the bedrooms, I don't know.
Probably your parents slept in one bedroom and the kids slept in the other.
But I do remember, before my father went to America, that Saturday morning we'd get into his bed, and he would teach us Hebrew. He'd lay there, and he was very, my mother had no time to be, she wasn't the affectionate type. And she did her duty and her chores and everything beautifully. But to be affectionate towards the children, I never saw her. Well,
that's what Uncle Ruby was telling this morning, that you didn't show outward affection, but that you felt affection. You felt it.
In 1922, I took my first trip to Ohio. And they took me to the station. And she kissed me goodbye. And I'm 22, I was 24 years old. That's the first kiss I remember my mother giving.
Is that right?
And I took a berth, a sleeper. And I went into that sleeper, and I cried half the night.
Is that right?
It never affected me before. I didn't expect it. Nobody... I used to go to my girlfriend's house and see that the parents were, more affectionate, but I thought that was just a matter of course. But when she kissed me that night, I cried half the night going into Ohio.
Isn't that so?
But she was good. And I was married in Ohio. She came in about 2 months before. And when I had the baby, she came in when I had the baby, and she just did. And I'll tell you, I'm a lot like her. Of course, thinking back the way she was, I try not to be that way, but deep down, my nature is that way too. I'm not the over-gushy type. But my father was more, he was more affectionate, like I say, Saturday morning. Otherwise, there was no time. Because Saturday, you went to shul, and I guess he went to shul every day. That I don't remember.
Now, you say your father taught you Hebrew. What language did you speak with each other? Yiddish, I assume.
Yiddish.
Did you speak Russian at all?
No.
No, you spoke no Russian.
And that's one thing that I can't understand. I came here when I was 8 years old. But it was more like our friends were mostly Jewish, and there was, there was no school in that city.
Right. Yeah.
And when the folks talked Russian at home, I would catch one word, and I knew what they were talking about.
Oh, your parents did speak Russian?
Oh, yes.
But with the children, they just spoke Yiddish?
That's right.
I see. So you,
yeah.
And you didn't have any Russian friends that you played with, that you would have to speak Russian
we
with?
did, but the Jewish one, if they could help it, they didn't let us mingle. It wasn't like, here, I come to your house. I don't remember going to a Geisha house with a Jewish friend of mine.
No, I see. So, so you were obviously a poor family, right?
Yes.
You existed primarily on the barter system.
Yeah.
Zadie sold in exchange for what they bought him, and that's more or less what you existed on. Mm-hmm. What did you do for fun? You just played in the house and played with the kids?
Nothing. I don't remember anything exciting. I do remember going with my aunt. They had the forests there where they grew berries and things. And the way I think back, you had to have a ticket to get in, because I used to go with my aunt, and they would pick all kinds of berries and things they were allowed to and bring it home. But I remember somebody being with us one day, and I guess they didn't have the authorization to get in, and they saw like an inspector in the distance, and I know she did. That's thinking back,
Right, yes.
When I go to bed, I lay there and you think back a lot.
Sure.
So that's what I think, that you used to get like a season ticket. You could come in, you could pick oranges, you could pick apples. I remember berries. I used to pick the berries. And they'd come home with baskets loaded. So they had their existence.
Tell me, Aunt Ida, do you remember any incidents of anti-Semitism while you were in Russia?
No. We had a few friends who were not Jewish, but of their parents being anti-Semitic, I don't think they were. But I do remember we had, like out in the hallway, like for cold storage, there was a hole dug in the floor with a ladder. And I know at one time the soldiers had something to do, and they were scheduled to march through our city. And I remember my mother picking each one of us up and going down the ladder and hiding us in there until the soldiers marched through.
Afraid of one of the pogroms, I think.
That's right. That's the only thing I remember.
You amazed me when I spoke to you on the phone the other day. You were telling me that you still keep Passover the way your grandmother taught you to. What do you remember of your grandparents? Because I have no recollection of my great-grandparents. That's what they would be.
Well, my mother's parents, of course, I couldn't remember. She was 5 when her mother died, 5 when her father died, 18 when her mother died. My father's parents, I do remember, because when my father went to America, we lived with them. So we had to give up the house, and we lived with them. They had their own home, my grandparents. And we brought them to America, I think in 1911.
This was after you came here, you sent for them?
After. We came in 1906. And my father sent for his 2 brothers before we came.
Well, we're going to get into that in a little while, okay?
And I know my grandfather died in 1914, my grandmother in 1927.
What did he do, your grandfather? He was a tailor also.
But he didn't work too much. He died when he was 68, and he didn't do too much. So they lived with a daughter. And when he died, my grandmother alternated. She stayed with us for a while, she stayed with another aunt for a while, she stayed with her daughters for a while. But later, when she was past 70, she remarried.
Exactly, when she was past 70.
Yeah.
That's unusual in an
Yeah.
Orthodox household.
Well, it
isn't
was somebody, a 42nd, distantly, very, very distantly related. Or maybe it wasn't related, maybe it was the father of an in-law. Because I don't remember him
Of course,
in my
yes,
youth.
of course.
But she married, and but then he died, and she had to come back to her children, and she died in her daughter's house.
I see.
But my grandmother wasn't the overly...
Doting type, similar to your
That's
mother.
right, that's
I
right.
see. Now, I realize in those days there were no movies or television, but were there special places it would be a treat to go? That the
In
friends-
America, you mean?
No, when you were still
Europe?
around. Yeah, when you were still around.
Nothing
You just
better.
played around the house
That's
with,
right,
with
that's
your
right.
with your brothers and sisters and.
I know my uncle came, and my father had she had a sister and a brother. The sister lived in the same town, but the brother lived, I couldn't tell you what city, but, and I know he came to visit once, and he brought us chocolate candy wrapped in tinfoil, gold tinfoil, like you see here. And boy, that was such a treat.
Big treat, huh? Big treat.
But I don't remember, candy. We would have candy here once in a while, probably bought in that store, but nothing.
But you never went anyplace,
No,
never.
never.
Picnics in the park or
No,
something like that, or
no.
rowing on a lake, none of
No.
that at all.
Just eat and sleep.
Right. How much do you remember of cousins and friends and people like that, but still in Russia now?
In Europe.
Yeah.
Well, my mother's brother had 4 boys. We saw them very little. I remember all of them. But I don't remember visiting them. They used to visit us more. And we just visited. I don't remember them sleeping over. I don't know just how far, they lived.
Yeah.
But I remember them.
And Dinah, what do you remember of discussions between your mother and father about the decision to emigrate to the United States?
Well, there were men who went to America to seek their fortune. They would come back, they'd stay there a year or two, work and earn enough money, come back to Russia to take their families to the States. And they just raved about it. How everything was nice, people did as they pleased. They liked the homes, the apartments, and another good reason, my father was in the service, and they treated them very badly. And he said he does not want his brothers to serve. He had 2 younger brothers. So...
You mean the military service?
That's right, yeah.
Your father was in the military
My
service?
father was.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. But you mean he was away from the house?
Yes, he was away from the house.
I didn't realize this. But how long was he gone?
Well, when they are drafted, they have to stay, I guess, a couple of years, I don't know. But my father was drafted. Your father was already born. I was on the way. And every so often in the service, I couldn't tell you how many years, I couldn't tell you just how often or how far apart they did that. But when they would get the military men together, they would draw a lucky number. Of the whole crew that was drafted, the one that drew the lucky number did not have to serve. Well, I was born 5 o'clock in the morning. My father gets a letter, 5 o'clock in the morning, on this and this day, I gave birth to a baby girl. My mother gets a letter, 5 o'clock in the morning, on this and this day, I drew the lucky number and I'm coming home.
Oh, wow. Now this is coming home for good?
For good.
In other words...
Of all the people, and like I said, I don't know how often they did that, but of all the people that were there, he drew the lucky number and he came home for good. So all my life, I was called the lucky one. I'll tell you another reason why I was called the lucky one.
Yeah?
We came to America in 1906. In 1907, there was a big depression. My father's brother, whom he had brought over to America, lived in Brownsville. We lived on the east side, and we would go to visit every so often. They did not have the L's. They had streetcars. And we're standing waiting for the streetcar, and people boarded. We were like next to go, and there was no room. We were 4 children. My mother held 2 of our hands in her hand. My father held 2 in his hand, and I see something on the floor by the wheel. I pull away from my mother, bend down, and pick up something, and as I pull my mother pulled me, she almost pulled my arm off. And as I pulled away, the wheel started turning, the streetcar left. Well, whatever I picked up, she gave to my father. He put it in his pocket. When we got to Brownsville and we started walking from the streetcar to my aunt's house, they took the thing out, and they opened it. It was a purse, and they found $207.
Oh, my
No
God.
address, no nothing.
Oh, wow.
And in 1907, $207 is like $5,000 today.
I know. So,
I was called lucky.
well, you sure are. So, okay, but getting back to the decision to come to this country, how did it start? Did your father come home one day and say, I think we should go to America?
No, they discussed it at home.
Uh-huh.
And
How long did it take them? How long had they been discussing it before they finally decided, yes, this is something we should do?
well, of course, I don't remember exactly, but they did discuss it quite a bit.
Was it a question of weeks or months or years?
Months.
Uh-huh.
I know my father's parents did not want us to leave.
Uh-huh.
And even when my father was still in America and talking about us coming over, his mother sent him a letter. I was always sickly.
Yes.
And his mother sent him a letter that she didn't think I would make the trip across the ocean.
Uh-huh. Well, we'll talk about that trip.
She was more a little on the selfish side.
Right.
She wanted her children, near her.
Now,
But I did hear the discussion quite a bit. It wasn't years. It wasn't years.
no. Did your mother agree right away, or did she have some misgivings? Or there had to be some misgivings. This was a big step.
That I couldn't tell
You
you.
don't
I
remember.
don't
Yeah,
remember.
because of course it was a patriarchal society too. Papa could have said we're going, and that would have been it,
Yeah.
right? But I'm sure that he did.
No,
discuss
he
it.
didn't. He wouldn't pick up. He left my mother pregnant and went.
Uh-huh. But we'll talk about that in a while.
But he didn't leave us destitute because we went to live in his parents' house.
I see. Because I was going to ask you how you were able to live without your
Oh,
father's
no. He
income.
sent money home
He
regularly.
did.
Oh, yes.
He did. Of course, this is the classic story of many of the immigrants that came over here. Not only the Russian Jews, but the Italians and the Irish too, where the father came over first and then sent for the family. Of course, there were some cases where the father came over and never sent for the family.
Yeah, true.
But that, not with us, of course. All right? What were their motivations? Why did they want to come here? We sort of talked
to get
about
away
it.
from the czar, the strictness. And like I said, my father went mostly to save his brothers from going to the service. And he sent for his brother before he sent for us, for the older, the one next to him.
I see.
And but my uncle was already in the service, and he sneaked away from the army. He stole across the border. If ever for any reason he had to be sent back or he was not admitted to the United States, he'd be shot.
Yes, sure. Desertion.
So my uncle came here, and then the 2 of them worked and sent for the youngest brother, who was not eligible for the service yet. And then, too much money my father didn't have, and he figured if he waits until he saves up enough money to send for us, he saw the school system here. He liked it. We would be too old to go to school. So there were people who made a living that way. You bought your tickets on time. So he bought tickets on time. And he sent for us. Well, your father was already 10. We all graduated from public school. Your father graduated from public school.
That's Barnum.
Barney. He went to evening high school, took up bookkeeping. See?
Now, your father left when?
In 1900, 1902, the summer of 1902.
Summer of 1902. He sent for his brothers, and then eventually he sent for you.
Yes.
When were you sent for? How long after
We
that?
came here in February 1906. 3.5 years.
Is that right? 3.5 years. And in those 3.5 years, you lived with his parents, is that it?
That's right.
And they took care of you, and they said, well, he sent money home.
He sent money.
I
He
see.
sent Molly and me earrings.
Now, what work was he doing here? Tailor?
Working as a tailor in one of the factories.
He was working in a factory, wasn't a small
and
shop.
they called him an operator.
Yes.
You know, you make the...
I see.
yeah.
I see. So apparently he had no trouble getting a job here.
No.
Did he know anyone here when he first came here?
Well, there were landslides that
Uh-huh.
lived here. And we came here...
That's family members. But members of
Not families, from the city.
From the city,
neighbors,
okay.
yeah.
Because there may be people who hear this tape who won't know where
We came
Landslides
here,
is.
we lived in 103 Monroe Street.
Yeah. Well,
There
before
was-
we
no,
get...
there was a 5-story building.
Uh-huh.
Almost everybody in the building were the neighbors from the town.
I see. So when he went there, he had written to someone to say that he was coming, and they met him and sort of took him under their wing and got him a
And
job.
he stayed. And you know who my father stayed with when he first came here?
I'm asking you, how come?
That's also history.
Yeah, sure.
You know of David Sarnoff, don't you?
Yes.
Head of RCA?
Yes.
He was born in the same time we were.
I never knew that.
And my father lived in his mother's house
Is that right?
until we came.
So how come you're not a big television star?
Huh?
Okay.
He was a brilliant.
Yes. So, did your father, were they friends when you were in Russia? David
sure,
Sarnoff and your father? Tell me
sure.
about their relationship.
Well, they were just once like.
Weren't you telling me when you visited my house that they passed each other on the street in this country and David?
Right,
Tell us
right.
that story.
My father came in through Canada,
Uh-huh.
and they knew that he was due in this particular day. And they waited for him, and David Sarnoff was a little boy. David Sarnoff was born in the way I figured, he was born in 1880. Oh, he must have been 1890. 1890 he was born. So I know David Sarnoff was 12 years old when my father came. And he waited on the street for him. And he saw a man walking with a suitcase and looking for numbers, and my father's Jewish name is Yosef, but they called him Yoshe.
Uh-huh.
So David Sarnoff ran over, is that Yoshe?
Uh-huh.
Come quick here, and he took him up to their apartment.
Oh, that's how he stayed with them.
Uh-huh.
I see. Okay, now let's talk about you leaving. Now, there was your mother and 3 children or 4 children?
4.
There was your mother and 4 children, okay? And he bought the tickets, right, with borrowed money, and he sent them to you, okay? Now,
He bought on time. He paid
yeah,
it out.
I understand that. Now,
And you know how much your ticket was to cross?
no.
$24.
Oh, my God.
And I came for half a ticket.
Is that right? For $12 United States back, it was a
Right.
bargain. All right. Now, so just a woman and 4 children is traveling by herself. So first you had to start in a horse cart, right?
First, we went from our town in a wagon, in a horse and wagon,
Right.
to the name of the city was Lebo,
Uh-huh.
on the border, right on the English Channel.
Uh-huh.
And we took a boat, and we got into London.
I see.
London, we stayed in a hotel. And like I told you the other day, I traced our trip.
Yeah.
And then the narrow strip from London to Liverpool, we went on a bus. We stayed in London 3 days. We had to wait for the boat to come in.
Now, was this a whole group of people that were going to do this thing together, like what we call a charter today, or were you going as individuals?
Individuals.
Uh-huh. Okay, so, and how did your mother know how to do all this?
I don't know.
She probably had a list of
She
instructions for
probably
this,
had
this,
to
this, and
do
that.
just what to do.
Uh-huh.
See, the ticket was from our town to America, and I guess on the ticket it was just what we had to do.
I see.
And
Amazing.
I know we left London and we went by bus to Liverpool. We boarded the ship in Liverpool.
Now you were how old then?
8.
You were 8, so you were...
Yeah, I remember.
Sure. You weren't an infant anymore.
Sure, I remember.
As you went to Liverpool, okay.
Yeah. And we boarded the boat. I don't remember if we stayed overnight in Liverpool or not, but we boarded the boat in Liverpool. In London, we stayed 3 days.
All right. Mm-hmm.
And it took us 8 days to cross the ocean.
What was the boat like? Where did you have a stateroom, or were you what they used to call
we came steerage.
Steerage. What? Explain.
But we had a room. We had a room. I remember.
Oh, explain. Describe what the room was like and what the accommodations were like.
The room was nice. We had 2 lower berths and 2 upper berths.
Uh-huh. But that's 4 berths, and you were 5 people.
Yeah. Well,
so where'd the 5th one?
Well, Bert was a baby. I don't know. Maybe he still left in the mother. I don't know.
Okay, he probably slept in the bed with somebody else. I see.
And I know I had an upper berth just above my mother.
Uh-huh. On the boat, did they feed you, or did you bring your own food?
No, they fed us.
They fed us, just like they do. Oh, but did they have kosher food for you people to eat, for the Jewish people to eat?
I couldn't tell you.
Uh-huh.
That I don't know. But I'll tell you one thing. I ate very little. I was sick. I think I gave up more than I put in. And I was in bed the entire 8 days, my mother and I. The other children, Uncle Bert was about 2.5 years old, and they went to the dining room.
Uh-huh.
My mother and I didn't. I don't remember being in the dining room. Our food was sent in, and I ate very little. And I know that the children every afternoon went on the boat, and they came back with candy, with oranges, with apples. They sent ours into the room.
Uh-huh.
But food just nauseated me, and I remember being up. I don't know if I should say that, but I remember throwing up like the devil. At that time, they didn't have
the Dramamines and all the.
And you know, we took a trip to Nassau about 10 years ago. We were in Florida, and I took a Dramamine on the way in. Coming back, I didn't. And you know, I was seasick. I had to go to the hospital on the ship.
Is that right? Yeah. Is that right? Well, now, how long did the crossing take from Liverpool?
From 8 days.
8 days. I see. Well, you were sick, so obviously you didn't play around.
I don't remember being on the boat. I don't remember eating in the dining room. The 3 children went. I think somebody took them, escorted them, and took them back. My mother and I remember things being sent in. I don't remember just what. But the food didn't, I was too sick to eat.
Now, I'm sure that the route that you took and all that was not unique to just Russian. So I'm sure that on the boat there were immigrants of other nationalities too, maybe Italian, Irish, English. Do you remember them at all? You don't remember that at all?
I remember in Ellis Island that room was full. But as to what kind of people, I don't know.
When you were on Ellis Island, you saw people from other nationalities who dressed differently, who spoke differently. Did this have any impact on you at all?
No.
You were still too sick, and you just wanted to see Papa. Huh? Do you remember your impressions as you saw the New York skyline from your ship?
The New York skyline, I don't remember. It didn't interest me, and
you were probably still sick in your bunk.
Because Ellis Island, I never saw so many people. And I looked, I couldn't tell you whether they came from different countries or, but I know there were a lot of people.
All right, now describe your experiences at Ellis Island, right? You stepped off the gangplank, right? Of the ship. Now, then what did you do?
Well, we came into the building, and we were in a big room. I don't even remember whether we were sitting or standing. But in front of us, separating us from the American side, it was like a chain link fence, you know. It was all open but closed, and all those who came to greet or to take the people were on the other side, and our names were called. And
how long did you have to wait before your name was called? Do you remember?
It was maybe a couple of hours.
Yes.
Yeah, and because we were examined first.
Right.
Uh-huh.
By the health officer.
Yeah, and some people were rejected.
Yes, I know.
But we were okay, and we got to where...
Do you remember the examination? How long did it take? Was it a real thorough examination?
A real thorough examination.
Do you have any idea how long it took for each person? A couple of minutes? A half an hour?
No, maybe 10, 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember especially the eyes, both before we left and after we boarded.
Uh-huh.
And I know my father didn't know Bert. And we had after we got past the to the American side of the,
yes.
We had to sit on a bench, and my father was interviewed, I guess asking the last personal questions before we were allowed to go in. And we were on the bench, the four of us, and there was another little boy. And this I remember, when we all got up to go with him, he says, "Isn't this little boy ours?" He knew there was one little boy he didn't know. And it wasn't. And I know my mother used to tease him about it.
So you went through the health officer, then you went to the immigration officer.
That's right.
Do you remember the questions that he asked you?
No,
or when you went?
no.
But at that point, your father was there.
He was there.
When you got the immigration officer, he was there.
He was there.
All right.
I know we had to sit on this bench while he had to answer certain questions, and then we were free to go.
Now, was there an interpreter there? Because your father didn't speak English?
There probably was. I don't know. I wasn't there.
Well, how long were you at Ellis Island altogether?
Just a couple of hours. We weren't there long.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
All right, so now you left Ellis Island.
Yes.
All righty.
Okay.
Now, where did you go and how did you get there?
Well, we walked about a block or so, and we boarded a streetcar. And I remember we had a lot of packages, I guess, and the four children, and I remember the conductor saying to my father, "Why don't you hire an express?" This I remember.
Your memory's fantastic. Okay, so you went.
went.
Yeah, so where did you go to?
We went. My father rented and furnished an apartment before we came.
And then where was this?
103 Monroe Street, 5 stories up.
No elevator.
But it was no. But it was nice. It was, after living there and going to friends' houses and all, a lot of the houses had wooden stairways leading up. Ours was stone, It was not wooden stairways to go up. And I know we had a nice kitchen. We had a living room, and we had 2 bedrooms. And in the living room was like a chaise lounge where one of us slept. We lived after we came here. We lived
That was
nice.
that was pretty
And
nice.
I remember my father coming upstairs once with a few bananas. We had never seen a banana, and he didn't know whether we would like it or not. So he bought a few, and he sliced it and gave us to taste to see if we'd like it. And then, but we were poor, but all the years we lived, very...
You always had to eat.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What was your mother's reaction to America and to this apartment with the running water and a toilet that flushed? I mean, this must have been...
The toilet was in the hall. It was not in the house.
But it was a flush toilet. I assume in Russia you didn't have that. No.
I remember going outside.
Right, so this must have been the height of luxury for you compared to what you came from. Your mother was pleased?
Yeah, she was very pleased, but I'll tell you, she didn't have too much time for anything because
Sure.
we came February 5th or February 6th. And your Aunt Sarah was born November 5th, which is exactly 9 months later.
Right.
So she didn't have too much time.
Right.
I remember she was pregnant and walking up the steps, and she used to pant, and I used to run up the 5 flights, and I wondered, why is she out of breath?
Now, how did she cope with, like, shopping, for instance? She couldn't speak the language.
Well, they had stores, where milk and bread and stuff like that. But they had streets where they had push carts. And she had a leather shopping basket. And all the peddlers were people who came from Europe.
So she could speak in Yiddish.
Those that had a trade got factory work. But some of them had business ability that they started on push carts and landed having their own factories.
I see.
They had business executive...
Well, Sarnoff, for instance.
Yeah.
Right.
Sarnoff on the roof, built it. They all laughed at him when he talked about like electronics and stuff. Everybody laughed at him. His mother wouldn't let him have any gadgets in the house. So he sneaked up on the roof, and he set himself up a thing on the roof. And when the Titanic sank in 1912, he got it on his thing on the roof before anybody got it, and ran to the Forwitz building, which wasn't far away.
Now, the Forwitz was what?
A Jewish newspaper.
Right, I see.
And he went to the Forwitz and told him what he heard. And the Forwitz was the first paper in the country.
You mean when the Titanic sank, it was a Jewish newspaper who had the exclusive extras?
That's right. And
how many people know that?
Very few. The Forwitz ran extras on the streets. See, then if it was anything extra, the boys would sell the paper. And he was, at that age, and people laughed at him. His mother wouldn't let him.
So he picked up the signal.
Yeah.
All right. So your father still had the same job as a tailor in the.
So my father was a tailor. He got a job in one of the factories, and he worked out.
All right. So now you lived at this Monroe Street how long?
Yeah. Let me see. We didn't live there too long.
Where did you move from there?
And then we got an apartment. I remember a 5-room apartment with a tub and a bath in the house. They rented the apartment on Sunday. And they got up Monday morning, and it was one block, the street. And the whole block was full of push carts, and it was an Italian neighborhood, and all Italians on there, in the building. So we didn't live there. It was beautiful. I remember a beautiful apartment. And we lived there about a year. We moved to 50 Market Street in 1908.
Now this is Brooklyn. This is Manhattan.
The East Side of New York.
East Side, Lower East Side. Right, okay.
And we lived there till 1913. In 1913, we moved to Brooklyn.
Now, where did you move to Brooklyn?
Where did we move? Dumont Avenue, 925 Dumont Avenue.
Now, when you moved to Brooklyn, did your father change jobs and was now working in Brooklyn?
No.
He still had the same job, but he just commuted from Brooklyn with the subway or the streetcar or something.
That's right.
Okay. And so now, you lived there for how many years?
On Dumont Avenue?
Yeah.
Dumont Avenue, we must have lived about a year. It was a beautiful apartment. It was a corner building. And all the buildings were low. It was like two-family houses. This had a grocery store downstairs and 2 stories up. We were in the second story. And it was on a corner. And there were windows all around. And the winters were miserably cold. I think we lived there one winter. I got pneumonia in that
Again.
So we moved to Cleveland Street, 708 Cleveland Street. Well, we lived there for about 3 years. And
now, meanwhile, how many children were there by now?
7.
Now you had 7.
And from Cleveland Street, there was a building, a 2-family. It was closed down for some reason, whether there was a fire or it was foreclosed. But somebody bought it and reopened it, and we rented one apartment. But I remember, we were big girls. We were 18, 19 years old. And the apartment was so filthy, and after being closed up, and my mother and my sister and I went there Sundays and afternoons, and we worked like the devil. We made it beautiful. And when the owners heard that there were 9 people, 7 children, and no, we were already 8 children, because Leo was born on Cleveland Street. 10 people. He gave us our deposit back. He wouldn't rent it to us.
After you'd done all that work cleaning it up?
After we did all that work. If it was today, I'd sue him for... So then they decided, well, if we can't rent an apartment, you have to buy your own house. So they started looking for a house, and then that was 1918. And then we moved to Bradford Street.
All right.
We found that house. It was, I guess, within their limit to buy.
Well, that's why I went in. Now, here's a poor immigrant family, right? You're over here now, what, 8 years, 9 years? How long are you over here? By the time you moved to Bradford Street, you'd been here how long in the United
By the
States?
time I arrived where?
By the time you moved to Bradford Street, how long had you been living in the United States?
Oh, 12 years.
Oh, it had been 12 years.
12 years. We came in 1906, and this was 1918.
Okay. Now, do you remember how much the house cost?
I think I do. Let me think. I think it was $5,700.
Uh-huh. Now,
and I know they took a second mortgage.
They took a second mortgage, so you got it for almost none of your own.
And the second mortgage, there were people at that. This I know from after I was married, and I came back to the house, and my mother was sick, and I handled all the expenses at that time. The second mortgage, there were people who in the business, they buy up second mortgages. You could not pay it off.
Right. Because they wanted the interest.
They wanted the interest.
No prepayment cost.
And I remember paying $90 every 6 months. I think it was a $300, a $3,000 mortgage. $3,000 at 6%. Yeah.
6% was a lot in those days, wasn't it?
6%, yeah. It would be $180. I paid $90 every 6 months. So that they could not pay off. But the rest of it, I don't remember how much they paid every month.
So in other words, the family needed very little cash outlay of their own.
Yeah.
To buy the house
they
with the second mortgage.
Yeah, they probably paid up to, if the second mortgage was $3,000, so maybe the first mortgage was about $2,000, and the rest they put, because their payments were not too big.
Right.
And then they rented one apartment, so.
That's right. And you had the downstairs, which you rented. Yes. At 295 Bradford Street. All right. Getting back to when you first got here now, what were your impressions when you first got to the country? You got out in the streets and looked at the country.
Well,
you remember what you felt?
Big. How big it was.
You were telling me that the town you left had one street, and now you're here in
and
Lower
5
East Side.
stories up.
That was a skyscraper.
Yeah. And of course, I was older. And in the building, we had all the people that we knew from Europe. But the outsiders...
In other words, there were people there not only from the same town, but whom you actually knew in the town.
That's right. That's why my father got the apartment there, so that my mother wouldn't be...
I see. That's fantastic.
And as far as shopping, you see, when the buildings were built, they were built with stores downstairs and apartments upstairs. So we had a bakery 3 doors away. And I remember going into the bakery with my mother, and this man... He had a pumpernickel that was maybe 18 inches round, and he would cut from it. So we come in once, and even in that, I thought to myself, how unsanitary. He takes that half a pumpernickel, puts it on his shoulder to bring it to the counter, from the shelf. And then he cut and sold it by the pound.
So and meanwhile, all the storekeepers who you were dealing with spoke Yiddish.
So that you spoke Yiddish, and the butcher was also downstairs, and the grocer was also a few doors away. And then on certain streets, they had push carts where they would sell materials, fruits. Grocers didn't sell any fresh stuff, fruits or anything. And
so it was primarily the size of this immense city. How long was it before you were brave enough to walk a few blocks away from where you lived to see what the rest of it looked like?
A little bit. I did. I used to on Saturday morning.
I'm sure it must have been a
thrilling...
There
was a park. There was Jackson Park. And my father would go to shul. I don't remember whether my mother went or not. And I would explore. I would get up and I would explore and walk all through there, walk through Jackson Park, and that was just. And then we had Grant Street. That was all business section. And I would take a walk to Grant Street on a Saturday afternoon. And we used to buy chocolate lollipops, big ones for 3 cents. I thought.
How badly did you miss people that you left behind in Russia? Was there anyone there that you really missed?
I didn't miss anybody at all.
Is there anything there that you missed? Nothing at all?
Nothing.
Just thrilled to get...
Because we didn't do anything.
Right. Here you had so much to do just out on the streets with the other kids, and so much to do, parks and things like that.
And
a streetcar ride must have been a tremendous experience for you.
Sure.
Now tell me, how uncomfortable was it for you? You know, not being able to speak the language and having what was for other Americans foreign ways. It must have been pretty uncomfortable for you.
It was for a while.
How did you cope with it?
And we met, like I said, when I first came, they wouldn't take me into school on account of trachoma in my eye. They found out in my eyelids after they took me into school.
You're lucky you got through Ellis Island.
They listed on Ellis Island. So that's contagious. So I had to stay by myself. But when I did, by the summertime was vacation time, you know, we did have, but they'd call us greenhorn.
Yeah.
And some kids would, you know, they hang around and say, greenhorn popcorn, 5 cents a piece. July, God the hell and die.
Society hasn't changed much.
I thought I'd put that in.
Yes, of course. These are the impressions that the things.
And
this is the history you'd like
in
to know.
September I started school.
Okay, now how did you start school? These were American schools being taught in English. You didn't speak English.
I didn't. I was going into school. It was kind of hard. I didn't understand the teacher.
Well, how did they know? I mean, besides the Jewish immigrants, there were certainly Italian immigrants and Armenian immigrants.
Right,
and the teacher had all these kids in the class, none of whom could speak the language. There was no common language. How in the world did they teach, and how in the world did you learn?
I'll tell you, I know, I think back as though it came to me automatically. We would sit down, and we were all, the teacher would speak in English, but we had on the wall, in squares, the alphabet, the numbers, 1 through 0, and she would try, you know, to explain to us. It was hard, you know, at the beginning, but when you're young, you learn fast. And of course, I was older. I was a good student, but I was older than the average. Some of the girls were 6 years in my class. I was 9.
Right.
So, and I remember one little girl that always made fun of me, and at the end of the term, she did not pass, and I did, and I was so happy.
I'm sure you must have been.
But I didn't find it hard. I didn't find it hard learning the language. But I was enthused with it. You know, it like opened my head to stuff that I wasn't accustomed to. And my mother, even though she was a foreign woman, and when we were even in the higher grades, where other children went out to play, we weren't allowed to play. She used to say, "Has homework?" We had to do our homework first. We got a lot of homework that guys.
Now tell me, you know, was this an unusual concept? I mean, girls going to school and girls learning. You know, the Orthodox Jews in the old country, they never educated girls.
Over here.
But your mother still had this.
Oh, yes.
Well, was that one of the motivations, you think, of the family coming over here so that the children could get an education?
Right, that's what.
Because I know classically for all the immigrants, this was one of them. And
in Yiddish, they didn't educate the women. Yeah. But my father told us later that if he waited until he had enough money to send for us, we would be too old to go to school.
So children going to school was one of the major motivations of the family moving here.
That's right.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Did you find in school, you probably did, that the Italian kids stuck together and the Irish kids stuck together and the Jewish kids stuck together?
No.
You didn't?
No.
Was there, particularly at the beginning in the early grade, do you remember, was there a difference in costume? I'm sure that they dressed differently.
Yes.
You could almost tell a person's nationality by how they dress.
That's right. And they'd have their accents were, accents were different. I know we had Irish girls in our class, but we mixed. There was no animosity.
There wasn't?
No.
That's good to know. So you learned English more or less in the school, and of course out on the street you heard a good deal of it. And if the Jewish girl wanted to play with the Irish girl, the Italian girl, the only common language they had was English, so you learned that way too.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Did you feel any discrimination or resentment from the teachers or other students because you were Jewish or because you were a foreigner? None at all.
In fact, in the 3rd grade, we had a Jewish teacher, Miss Levy.
That was unusual in those days.
Yeah.
All right, now you've been here now for, 12, 14 years. After you came over here, was there ever a time when your parents thought maybe it wasn't the right thing to do? Did they ever have any misgiving that maybe we shouldn't have left?
No.
They never regretted the
Never
decision.
regretted.
And I'm sure you didn't either. What kind of hours did your father work?
He worked long hours. I think he worked from 8 to 6, maybe earlier.
Uh-huh.
Because there was no union at the beginning in those days.
And he worked 6 days a week?
Worked 6 days a week. He did not work on Saturday. He
Yeah.
worked on Sunday.
Uh-huh.
Even when I started to work, I worked 6 days a week. I worked in a religious place, and I had to come in on Sunday. And I worked also from 8 to 6 when I started work, and 8 to 5 on Sunday.
Mm-hmm. What kind of man was your father? Describe his personality, his character.
He was an easygoing, and a nice. He never disciplined us harshly, and we were good kids. But we did as we pleased, and he would read his newspaper every night, and the stories of interest in the paper he would read out loud. My mother could read too, but she was always busy with babies and
kids and cooking. Yeah,
yeah.
Sure.
But he was a very
he participated with the children.
Yeah,
he spoke to the children.
My mother did too, to a certain extent, but she was too busy doing everything,
Mm-hmm. So his relationship with the children was a warm relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
He wasn't aloof.
No, oh no, not even with my mother, although she was stricter.
Now you've told me something about your mother before. Would you like to elaborate? What kind of woman was she? What kind of mother was she? What kind of wife was she? What kind of person was she?
She did her duty as a wife, as a mother, more than women of today do, but in a strict kind of way. It was a duty.
In other words,
She had to feed her family. She had to wash the clothes. When we were older, we had our duties to do. And that's one thing I know when I went to school, if it was before a holiday, like Rosh Hashanah, Passover, a lot of the students, there were mostly Jewish girls in the class, a lot of the students would stay home to help their mothers because it was a holiday. My mother never kept us out of school. The 8 years that I skipped a couple of times. I went to school 7 years during the 8 years that I went to school. The only time that I remember being out was when I had pneumonia. And I did have through school, a couple of times too. That's why I'm in Phoenix, because And but we had our chores at home. I know we had a buffet with cut glass, 10-cent pieces, Every Thursday night, it was between my sister Molly and I, we had to put a basin in the sink and fill it with soapy water and bluing so to make it shine like cut glass. And dust and put that back. I got down on my hands and knees. The kitchen floor was wood, and scrubbed that kitchen floor on my hands and knees, and she would put newspaper over it.
I remember the newspaper.
So we could go to school on Friday, and she got through with her cooking and her baking. We were never kept home from school for helping. In the morning, the breakfast dishes, the lunch dishes were put in the oven. We had a coal stove, and this was winter. We came home from school. I did all the dishes. Molly took the children out for air after 3, while the sun was out. And, the house was run very systematically, and she did her duty like when you come to work, there's this to do and that to do and that to do, and not because she was mean or anything, but she had too much to do.
And she insisted you do your duties as well.
That's right. She cooked and she baked, and we had our meals, and she sewed for us too.
Sure.
So, she had a lot of work to do. She had no time for play.
Right. So even though she wasn't an overly sentimental or emotional woman, she did what the traditional chores of the wife was toward the house, toward the husband, toward the children. Tell me, Aunt Ida, what you remember about all your brothers and sisters, right? There were 8 children in the family. I suppose at times it was a riot and at times it was a picnic.
Mm-hmm.
The firstborn was my father, Barney, right?
Yeah.
What are your recollections of him as a child and even as a man later?
No, he was all right.
He was born when? Do you remember?
He was born, I got on here.
Uh-huh.
He was born December 3rd.
December 3rd. You remember what year?
1895.
1895. What kind of person was he?
He was a good person. He was smart. He had his hobbies.
What were his hobbies?
When he got older, I know he used to send away, they used to call them bunks. He had a few friends and they'd send away, like you read in the paper now, send away coupons and they'll send you this and they'd call them bunks. He always dabbled in photography. And when we lived on Market Street, now that was before 1900, well we moved there 1908, 1909, 1910, and the bathroom was out in the hall. He had what they called he had a lantern, I remember, a lantern with a red bulb. It couldn't have been a bulb, we had no electricity. But it was red. That he developed his pictures in there. It had to be a dark room.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he had it was like a lantern that was red. What he had in there, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But he always, he took pictures. He got a camera, I don't know how or when. But he took pictures, he developed them, printed them. And he was a good student, but of course he came here when he was 10 years old. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't go to high school, we were too old. Mm-hmm. He was 17 when he graduated from, but he went to evening high school. He took up bookkeeping. His first job was a bookkeeper.
Mm-hmm. What kind of brother was he?
So, okay.
Did he take care of his kid sister and you get along
very
well?
He and I were very pretty close.
Uh-huh.
Molly was, after you get in your teens, it's the same thing. But when you're young, he and I were exactly 2 years apart.
Uh-huh.
And Molly was already 5.5 years younger than him, so
you two were pretty close then.
Yeah, so we two were pretty close.
Uh-huh. You got along well with your mother and father? And
yeah, oh yeah. With our parents, we got along, all the time. There were no...
Okay, so after Barney was you,
mm-hmm.
right? And then came...
together sometimes separate.
An interruption here. What were the rules of the family on the girls dating?
No. I'll tell you, we didn't date too young.
Uh-huh.
But I remember I had a date, we went to a graduation. And my aunt, my mother's sister, she stayed over at the house for some reason. And I know when we were one flight up, and I know when I went out and I looked up and they were both looking through the window, pleased as punch,
Uh-huh.
But we were kind of trusted because we were good kids,
yeah. Well, of course, you took responsibility by the work you did in the house. So now tell me about Aunt Molly, right? She was a good...
So as far as our natures, we're as unlike even today.
Uh-huh.
Because where I was more a studious type, and always with flying colors I passed. She just made it, Where we were both, from Europe, and she's 2.5 years younger than I am, and I was a bookkeeper and she was a sales girl. See, I'm not, she's a different, in our family, all of us, some of us are just, and some of us, if we were today with people with means and people, we would have been more than what we are.
Yeah, sure.
So, but she was always with my mother in the kitchen. She loved to cook. She loved to bake. And even today, she's an excellent housekeeper and an excellent cook and baker. Where I did my duty, but I have other things that, I like to socialize. I have loads of friends here. And, we do, Ruby laughed at me yesterday. I have a group, we play cards together for about 25 years. We came in from California on Tuesday. I unpacked and did things on Wednesday. Yesterday morning I went out to play. They wanted to visit here, and they were trying to get me. I wasn't home. And at night, where were you all this? So I told him, and I said, now, Aunt Molly, even in our youth, if Monday was her washing day, and 7:30 you'd find her in the basement. If you called up at 7 o'clock, it says, Molly, let's go out today, and if she had to make $1 million, Monday was her wash day and she wouldn't go. Mm-hmm. If you called me and my stuff was washing, I'd shut off the washer and out I would go. So, we're two different, but even now, they come here almost every winter. When she was widowed, she'd come every winter and spend 3 months. She remarried, and 2 winters she has come here with her husband. And we get along beautifully, but when she comes, I've got to turn over the kitchen. And when she leaves, I got a freezer full of cake and stuff that...
That sounds like a great investment.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll get to visit me.
So, we're two different types, yet we get along together, and...
And with the other children as well.
Mm-hmm.
And after Molly was Uncle Bert.
Uncle Bert. Of course, him being a boy, and...
Now, he was born when?
He was born 1902.
1902.
After my father. My father left my mother pregnant when he left Europe.
Uh-huh.
And he left in the summer, and Bert was born in December.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a sick kid when he had the croup when he was a kid, and it always left something. But he left home early. He didn't graduate from high school because he saw it was hard on the folks. And then...
You mean his income would have been more valuable if he could go out and work? Is that what you mean by being hard on the folks?
No.
You say he quit school because it was hard on the folks. What part was hard on the folks?
He felt not that he would have to contribute, but that the folks didn't have to contribute to him.
I see.
And the high schools then, they were not around the neighborhood. You had to go by train, so it was fair and all. Anyhow, he was a different type. And let me see, I was already away from home, but he left. Danny Kaye was a good friend of Uncle Bert's.
Yes, I know that.
And
Danny Kaye.
Danny Kaye. Oh, yeah, this is how he started. He went to the mountains. He would entertain with Danny Kaye. And he was on the stage for quite a while. He was on the stage with Frank Silvers, who wrote Yes, We Have No Bananas.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the stage with him for quite a while. And then he realized he still would have been with Danny Kaye. But Danny Kaye got the commitment and he had to go to China. Your Uncle Bert was not an American citizen. And somehow he could not get a visa for such length of time.
They couldn't get a passport, sure.
Yeah,
You can't get a visa if you don't have a passport.
For that length of time. That's when he broke up with Danny. And he decided it's time to go back to school. So he got a job with an orphan asylum as a head.
Mm-hmm.
And when the children were in school during the day, he went back to high school, or he took his high school points in college. I don't know, but he got his high school diploma, and he entered college, and he took up law. But it was about 6 months before he graduated. There was a tragedy with her mother. In the meantime, he met his wife, your Aunt Ruby, worked in the office in that orphan asylum. See? And they were married. They were not compatible. She was a brilliant girl, and he was a brilliant boy. But her mother was, I don't know. She mixed up, so it wasn't... But he had a good life with Aunt Ruby, and he didn't. He was active and on the go, where she was more on the quiet side.
Mm-hmm.
You see. And he wanted to do things, and she didn't want to do it. And he was held back. But otherwise, they were, as far as brain was concerned, they were compatible. But as far as others. But anyhow, it was 6 months before he had to graduate. Her mother was being put in an institution. They lived in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
And while waiting to get into the institution, she stayed with them. And one morning, see, their bathroom was long and narrow, and when you opened, the toilet seat faced you.
Mm-hmm.
And one morning, he opens the door to go into the bathroom, door's open, and there's his mother-in-law sitting on the toilet with her throat slit.
Oh, my.
And he got nervous breakdown. He never went back to school. But he always had a very good job in Pittsburgh. He was head of your cousin Lenny has the same job in Atlanta as Bert had in Pittsburgh. Lenny always looked up to him and took up in school what his Uncle Bert did. And he is doing in Atlanta what Bert did in Pittsburgh. They were head of it had to do with the veterans, the Hebrew, Jewish veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And he was head. He did a lot for the vets with through the Veterans Administration and all. And he did very well, but he left home young.
And now after him came Sarah.
Sarah.
Who was born when?
Sarah was born November 5th, 1906.
1906, all right? Now, what was she like as a
She
young
was
sister? And
tiny, but a brilliant girl. She only worked a year and a half before she was married.
Mm-hmm.
But in that year and a half that she worked, she was secretary to 3 attorneys in those years. But she married, and her life was different. She married a very wealthy boy, and but she got sick over the years, mentally sick.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shame what happened to her, So,
she was, as a sister, she was nice, and as a daughter, she was
yes.
nice. She got along well.
Yes, she used to come and visit us in Ohio, and yeah, sure. Until she got sick. She came even with Boyd when Boyd was a baby. And their married life was all right, but it would have been different if she were well,
Yeah.
So, but he was, at one time, Uncle Red's business was second highest in the country. Their millinery. Yeah. His father always said, his father used to, years ago, women's hats, they used to have like a buckram frames, and then they would trim it with with lace, with ribbon, with silk, and he would sell those frames to the stores, Red's father. And he says, I've got to have a big shop, and my sons aren't going to work. They're going to sit at the desk with their feet raised on the desk. And he did.
Nice work if you can get it, as you say.
Yeah.
Okay, and after that came Etta.
Yeah.
She was born when?
1908.
And what was she like as a sister, as a member of the family?
Well, she was very good as a sister. She was much younger than we are. So we gave her way. She wasn't exactly pampered, but we let her have her way in every way that she wanted. She was the youngest one, and much younger than all of us. And, of course, she was quite young when I left. She was about 15 when I was married, so in her
you didn't really know her that well as a sister.
I was not at home, but when we lived at home, we got along real well together.
And then Ruby was born when?
1911. Oh, he was a good kid, and he was very smart.
He was telling me this morning he was very close with you.
Huh?
Ruby was telling me he was very close with you.
And, well, when my mother was real sick, we had just lost our child, and we went, do you remember our baby?
No, I
You
don't.
know. And we
I know the story.
Yeah. And we went back home to live. I took care of my mother for 4 years, the last 4 years before she passed away. Then I was closer to the family. Then also Etta was home, and Ruby was, Leo was a teenager, but Ruby was a little older. But Ruby was going to college. Ruby educated himself, went to school at night, and he worked during the day, and I lived, at home, and then there was a bank about 3-4 blocks away, and what money he could bank, he gave me. I had it in my name, so that if he needed money, I could be there to pull it out, because he couldn't get at the bank. And when we moved, there was only $50 left, but I pulled it out and gave it to him. But it was very good in the house. He helped a lot in the house, too. Mm-hmm. And, of course, when he was married, he was only making $10 a week. But I guess she, Ruby went to work for Uncle Red.
I never knew that.
And
Uncle Red was Sarah's husband.
Sarah's husband. And Hilda worked there, too. That's where they met.
I never knew that.
You never knew that. Hilda was raised in Cuba.
That I knew.
Okay. He was taking Spanish in school. That was his foreign language.
Uh-huh.
And Hilda had taken one of her girlfriends up to Uncle Red's place to work. And one day, Ruby's passing by, and the two girls are talking Spanish. They were talking about him, what a good-looking boy he was. And he
and they didn't know that he could understand them.
And he walked over and he answered them in Spanish.
Oh, wow.
And that's how their romance started.
So Hilda had to marry him in self-defense almost.
Yeah. And she really loved him very much. And he didn't, he was still going to school, and he wasn't making too much money. So, and he was, let me see, I don't know just exactly what he was taking up. But her father's brothers were opticians. And they took him away from that job and gave him a job for more money in one of their offices so they could be, more together, like, you see. And just how he got into the sugar refining, well, I guess he took that as his major. And in time they were, they were married.
And then finally we come to the baby, Leo.
Finally we come to the baby.
Leo was born
1915.
1915.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was kind of hard as a child. He was the youngest.
Seven to be the baby with 7 brothers and sisters, either spoiled or beaten to death.
And I remember
he was pampered, you said.
My mother, I was home till Leo was about 8 or 8 and a half. And I remember my mother going outside with a bowl of cereal to sit and feed him. She never did that with us. Now she had more time. Leo was 4.5 years younger than Ruby. And my mother was 45 when he was born. So he was more or less pampered and spoiled. And he still today has that, I wouldn't call it arrogance, but something that the rest of us didn't have. You know what I mean? He's not meek or. I spent 2 weeks with him in Florida and when we stopped at your house, we went there. We spent 2 weeks there, and it was really the first time I'd really been real close because I left home when he was 8, and then the 4 years that I lived home, he was in their teens, and my mother was real sick, and I had 3 single people at home, and my brother-in-law Saul came, and he was there, and I really had my hands full. I just did my duty, over there, and lots of times your Uncle Ira didn't like, I worked too hard, and I would say, "Can't Etta, when we're through with supper, I'm getting up and walking away. You clean up the kitchen." But she had fancy underwear that she used to do on Sundays. Sunday I would cook the dinner and out I would go. We'd come to your house on Sundays. But during the week, I would take Etta's underwear, silk underwear, and wash it so she don't have to do. And she was very nice. And, you know, she did my chores at night so that I figured what he don't see won't hurt him. Because otherwise he came home, you know, I was always busy. And we got along very nice. And Cleo was here. He was all right. It was a little different having a youngster in the family after so many years, you know. But he was pampered. He was pampered a lot, you know.
Well, he doesn't seem any the worse for it, I know. He doesn't seem any the worse for it. I know he was always very nice with me. He used to take me around, take me to museums and things like that. One of my favorites, too.
He was very nice to us, too.
Aunt Ida, I know in those days, right, among the religious Jewish people usually got married because they were introduced by a matchmaker. Is this how your parents met? Was it arranged through a matchmaker?
No, it was not.
Well, what happened?
My mother had a boyfriend. Of course, there were boys and girls in the city. I guess my father had an eye for her. I don't know.
But he was not her boyfriend.
He was not
she had another boyfriend.
She had another boyfriend. The two boys were friends, my father and the other boy.
I see.
And my mother was scheduled to be married.
To the other guy?
To the other guy. And it was 2 weeks before the wedding, and the groom disappeared. He was gone a couple of days, and he came back, and my mother says, "Where were you?" He says, "Oh, I went to Minsk to do some shopping for the wedding." Well, she thought, if you could do this before we are married, what are you going to do after we are married?
She didn't believe that he went there just for clothes, I said.
No, I guess she did, but don't you, say something to your girlfriend, I'm going to Minsk, or let us both go to Minsk, let's shop for clothes or whatever it is. But he said nothing to her, he just disappeared. So she thought, what kind of a husband will he make? So she broke off about 10 days before the wedding. I guess a little time passed, and so my father started getting a little closer because he had liked her anyhow. And he married her. And he turned around and married one of my mother's girlfriends. But he ended up...
You mean the first guy? The guy that she jilted?
Yeah, married my mother's girlfriend. Now, my father came to America, sent for the family. This man came to America, never sent for his family. Her family in St. Louis, who were pretty well-to-do, came to Europe, brought the family over to St. Louis, went to New York, picked up this guy, brought him to St. Louis, here's your family, take care of you. Okay. So my mother was smart.
She knew a bad penny when she saw one.
That's right.
How, today, kids date, they ring a bell, I'm picking you up and all, but how in those days when moral codes were so strict and everything, how did they manage to see each other or go out on dates, or how did they get? How does a boyfriend get a girlfriend in those days when everything was so heavily chaperoned?
I'll tell you, it was a small town. Everybody knew one another. And if you saw somebody that was a good ballabuster, I knew she'd make a good wife. And some of it was arranged. Not that I remember all this. I was too young, but talk in the house. Because when we came to America, it was our apartment was in a 5-story building, and all the people from the village, when they brought their families, got an apartment in that building. And my folks knew everybody, and when we went to bed, the neighbors congregated for a cup of tea. But my ears were always alert, and I lay there till everybody left.
Well,
it wasn't that the rooms were upstairs, everything was compact. And I heard a lot of those stories from them.
I see. So she threw over this guy, and she ended up with Zadie, 8 kids, and a house on Bradford Street.
Right.
Well, that's fascinating. What I can't figure out, the story is really delightful, but it happened so long before your time. How did you find out about this?
Well, I'll tell you how I found out. I didn't know the story until a few weeks before I was married. I was married in Youngstown, Ohio. That's where Uncle Ira lived, and I figured I'm the oldest girl, and if I was married in New York, I don't care if I had a small wedding, but I didn't think going out of town, I wanted a big wedding. My folks could not afford it. You know, I didn't discuss it with them. But I figured it would be better, because if we were married in New York, Uncle Ira would have to, his parents were poor. He'd have to pay for their fare and accommodations, and we couldn't afford it. So I figured the best way was to be married in Ohio. And my mother came about 2 months before I was married. I left earlier, and my mother came about 2 months before I was married. In fact, I wanted to come to Ohio and go to work, not thinking of marriage. Mm-hmm. And my father pounded the table. No daughter of his is going to be a boarder someplace. So, you want to go to Ohio? You're going to get married. So, I went to Ohio. And my mother there, we had a few relations there. And the relations, of course, looked up Lonsling. And one of the Lonsling was my mother's girlfriend who married this man. And they lived in Youngstown, Ohio. Uh-huh. In fact, this woman baked all the cake for my wedding.
Oh, my. What a small world, eh?
And that is when my mother told the story. Oh. That she had married her, but she led a miserable life with her.
So Bubby was pretty smart after all.
So she was smart after all.
Okay. Aunt Ida, I think you are a fantastic woman with a phenomenal memory. I shall share this tape with all current generations and hope that it be passed on to future generations. I am sure that all who hear it will get as much excitement and fun out of hearing who we are, where we came from, and how we got here, as I did. Thank you for your patience.